Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, AP English, and our World of Ideas lectures. We are in the Jacobus volume, unit number 6, Culture. This is lecture number 33, De Vaca's Relacion. And this is from De Vaca's narrative, translated. We're going to be working with the Fanny Bandler translation. Now, this is a fascinating reading for a number of reasons. Our assumptions are that you've already been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net in the AP folder, the World of Ideas folder. If you haven't, I'm going to be making some references to earlier lectures. We are in this unit specifically with culture, and we just finished with Herodotus, so we'll be making maybe some references to that lecture as well as to preliminary ones. We also are assuming that you're familiar with our learning theory, that desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways by our active reading, our annotation, where we answer 3 guiding questions. What does the text say? What does the text mean? How can I relate to this text? At level 1, what does the text say? We summarize with a paragraph summary. At level 2, what does the text mean? We subdivide it to themes, messages, and our big 5. What does this text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology and who you are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then finally theodicy, the existence of pain, suffering in the world, and how you account for it. At 2b, we ask about rhetoric, not what De Vaca has to say, but how he says it. His storytelling is brilliant in this reading. At level 3, how can I relate this to 3a, other titles that I'm familiar with? And then finally, how can I relate it to myself? As we have said many times in our study of the great ideas and the great books, any time that you hear someone call it a great idea or a great book, you have to say, yeah, it's a great idea or a great book for you. It's not for me until I understand it, and then I accept it, and I own it in some way. That's why 3b for us is such an important element in our reading. Let's begin with some brief bio really quickly. Our dates, 1409 roughly to 1560. Again, like Herodotus, we're not absolutely sure. Okay, born and dies in Spain, but has this great life as an explorer of the American Southwest. He was the treasurer of a 300-man expedition that arrived in Tampa, Florida in 1528. Then he gets shipwrecked off of Galveston Island in Texas, the Isle of Ill Fate, he calls it. And he then will go through a process that is truly incredible. Escaping capture, surviving for some 8 years, traveling some 6,000 miles all over the America Southwest, ultimately meeting up with some Spaniards in Mexico in 1536. And then he decides to write of his travels in the Relacion. And 1542, that text is published, and it, of course, is one of the great texts in anthropology. Now, there's a lot of debate about De Vaca and the way he presents his information. I'm just reading now Jacobus's introduction on 498. Some of the most striking features, he will say, of De Vaca's rhetoric are his declarations of religious faith. Given the nature of Spanish culture in the 16th century, such declarations may well have been pro forma, a requirement for his audience, in other words. However, his faith may also have been as strong as he says it was, right? Throughout the physical hardships of his journey, the grueling hikes, the bouts of near starvation. We think of Dante, of course, in the Divine Comedy, especially the Inferno. Go back and take a look at LearnStrong.net to see lectures on that one. De Vaca kept a firm faith in God and the power of prayer to sustain him. I think you have to take De Vaca on face value, that he went through some really bad stuff, and because he went through some bad stuff, his faith and his decisions to pray probably do make some sense. To continue with Jacobus, most surprising perhaps are the descriptions that De Vaca gives of his own role as a shaman or a traditional healer within the Avares community. In many Native American societies, the shaman was a highly esteemed figure who was called on to heal the sick or injured through both prayer and herbal medicines, right? Archaeological research indicates that shamans were usually better fed, housed than ordinary tribe members. So apparently, just to continue and finish, De Vaca was thrust into this role by the Avares who he spent time with, and they referred to him and his companions as children of the sun and ascribed divine powers to them. Now, ironically, De Vaca attributes his Christian faith as the source of his healings he performs. When he offers a remarkable account of raising a man from the dead, he claims that he thinks of Jesus, approaches the man, makes the sign of the cross over him, and later learns that the man has revived. As with all historical documents, the reader now must decide what level of credibility to grant the author. However, it is clear that de Vaca's Relacion offers a look into one of the first interactions between two starkly different cultures that would nevertheless become deeply intertwined in the years to come. Now, let's turn to the rhetoric of de Vaca real quickly and get a sense of how we're going to mess around with that one. Jacobus begins by pointing out that one enduring question about this reading concerns its purpose. Some historians have asserted it was primarily a political document designed to support the Spanish official policy that discouraged taking Native Americans as slaves. Okay, so there's that argument. On to page 499, perhaps even more relevant to the Spaniards of the 16th century would have been the usefulness of the document to justify the Spanish conquest of the Southwest and, of course, Mexico. The next paragraph, the rhetorical device we're going to concentrate on in our notes is narrative, this telling of stories. At the end of that paragraph, de Vaca will pay special attention to women, the ways they're treated by men. In some cases, women are peacemakers, as when they arrange a truce after a raid. In other cases, women are the cause of the war. And then to finish, Jacobus' observation at the bottom of 499, like Herodotus, de Vaca remains relevant to us by offering vivid details about the lives of people whose culture is different from ours. The last passage in the selection that follows is perhaps most telling when it states that, quote, all men are curious to know the habits and devices of others, end quote. There's your ontological observation right away, a fact that drives contemporary literature as much as it did the narratives in de Vaca's day. Let's go to it now quickly, paragraphs 1 through 29. We'll start with paragraphs 1 and 2. He says, Indians brought us their sick, asking Castillo to cure them, which he did by praying to God. Later, we encountered other groups of Indians. Paragraphs 3-5. Two Sisulas asked Castillo to go with them to cure a wounded man. Castillo feared that he would fail, so I went instead. I discovered, he says, that the wounded man had died, but I prayed over him anyway, and later we learned that he had revived. The grateful Indians gave us gifts of tunas and flint stones. Tunas is this plant, right? A prickly pear cactus. Okay. And then paragraph 6. We lived among the Avaras for 8 months, curing many of their sick. Paragraph 7 through 8. The Indians told us of a frightful man who once wandered among them, mutilating people, causing disturbances. We explained that the man was a demon and could not harm them if they believed in Christ. Paragraph 9. Although the Indians treated us well, our living conditions, like theirs, were austere, hard, right? Paragraphs 10 through 11. We encountered a couple of different groups of people, the Malciones as well as the Arbodos. They later were badly malnutrition. Living among them, we suffered great hunger, eventually obtaining 2 dogs for food. Our naked skin was constantly burned by sun and wind, the hardest experiences. Paragraph 12. We were also cut badly by thorns and spikes, my only comfort being to recall the greater suffering that Christ endured for me, he says. This is a deeply religious Christian text. Paragraph 13. Our work for the Indians included scraping and tanning skins. The scrapings provided food, as did occasional pieces of meat. Paragraphs 14 through 16. After regaining our strength, we set out traveling and met other Indians. They were afraid of us at first, but eventually treated us with great hospitality, giving us what little food they had. This is a compelling section of the reading to note people without anything sometimes will help others instead of themselves. Quite remarkable. Paragraphs 17 through 19. The various tribes we met had similar customs. Husbands do not live with their wives during pregnancy, and in childless couples, the young men may leave their wives and remarry. Mothers nurse children until the age of 12. So, paragraph 17 through 19, some of the more controversial parts of the reading. Much of it because, of course, so different from the culture that de Vaca was writing for at the time, and of course still quite different from today. Paragraph 20, how about resolution, a conflict resolution? Settling disputes in an Indian village involves physical fighting. Those who quarrel leave the village for a time but are later welcomed back. Paragraphs 21-24. The men are skilled warriors, protecting their families, fending off enemies. While living with the Aguinas, I witnessed a violent ambush and counterattack. He says the worried tribes, however, were soon reconciled. Paragraph 25. The Indians stay alert and armed all night if they suspect any form of an attack. Paragraphs 26, 27. In battle, they bravely dodge the arrows of their foes and the shots of our weapons, but they greatly fear our horses. Paragraph 28. Whoever fights Indians must show no fear or desire to take their possessions, for the Indians take heart in the fear of an enemy and later seek revenge. And then finally, to finish, paragraph 29, the Indians recover quickly from battle wounds, have superior eyesight, hearing, and physical stamina. And there's the essay. Now let's work really quickly at level 2 and 3. First of all, at 2A, our big 5. What does this text say epistemologically? Well, it's an interesting text in that regards, because certainly de Vaca will express a certain level of faith that sounds very close to epistemologically the absolutist position. He is absolutely certain. But I want to make the argument that it's pretty clear that he's also working with a fallibilist orientation epistemologically, in that he knows that his audience is going to be challenged to consider some of the ways they see the world as being quite different from the descriptions, positive descriptions that he gives of these indigenous peoples. Ontologically, what does this text say? Well, we're all strangers to ourselves in some way, and then of course others are also strangers to us, and yet we're all somehow connected. Psychologically, what does this text say? Well, obviously you've got to overcome a lot of fear to be able to endure, to survive. And sociologically, the respect of other cultures is central, no question, to what it is that he's suggesting. Theodicy, and the question of theodicy and the existence of pain and suffering in the world, for much of this reading, de Vaca, of course, will rely on his faith, his convictions in his belief in his Christian theology, to ask the question, why is this happening for me rather not to me? Because, of course, in his Christian theology, he believes, go back to our comments on Milton, that there's reasons for the pain and suffering that I'm experiencing. It deepens my faith, one might say, of de Vaca. The themes and the messages of 2A, well, obviously respect for others is important. Knowing oneself well usually happens only through experiences of excruciating pain. Learning to know others is such an important part of living in this world, and that people are actually quite surprising what their generosity and their abilities to show and care for others is. At level 2B, well, obviously we've got great narrative going on here, we've got great storytelling going on here, and obviously there's the question about how much of this are we to believe versus to take on just face value, right? And finally, at 3A, well, obviously Herodotus immediately comes to mind. Notice the similarities of telling stories to make a point, the power of narrative. And finally, at 3B, what was a time that you were shocked by another culture, or you were shocked by what someone did, and you did not expect it from them at all? It kind of blew your mind, and to that degree, you thought differently about the culture at large, because this individual was very open and kind and generous, we might say. Of course, we could ask a time that it didn't work that way. And the source often of so much racism is in fact that, taking one single moment and somehow generalizing, which is an insane thing to do, and yet we often are guilty of it, and therefore should challenge ourselves to be better and to do better. Well, there you go, the de Vaca reading. I hope it'll challenge you to maybe want to even read more of his story. It's quite a remarkable story. Thank you.